Welcome to the Clara Horatio Daily World Brief, available at claranoratio.com. Today is June 6th, 2026. Next week, the United States, along with Canada and Mexico, will jointly host the FIFA World Cup. And against all odds, Iran's national football team just secured U.S. visas to play their group stage matches. But overnight, the reality on the ground shifted completely.
The shaky April ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran is it's entirely fracturing today. We are seeing American and Iranian forces actively launching ballistic missiles and attack drones at each other across the Persian Gulf.
When you put those two things side by side, we are looking at the concrete reality of what happens when the foundational systems you rely on, from international sports to your grocery bill, start fracturing all at once. What exactly happened in the Gulf over the last 24 hours?
The military exchange escalated incredibly fast. United States Central Command forces struck Iranian coastal radar sites, specifically targeting military infrastructure in the city of Guruk and on Karab Island. The Pentagon is characterizing this strictly as a defensive maneuver.
Defensive because they intercepted those drones first, right? I mean, the report said there were 4 Iranian one-way attack drones aimed directly at the shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz.
And following those U.S. strikes on the radar sites, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps immediately retaliated. They fired 7 ballistic missiles targeting U.S. air bases in Kuwait and naval facilities in Bahrain.
Did any of those missiles actually make impact?
Air defense systems intercepted 6 of them. One missile failed to reach its target entirely, but the sheer scale of firing ballistic missiles at U.S. bases marks a severe escalation from the proxy skirmishes we saw earlier this spring.
That military reality sits alongside this bizarre diplomatic subplot. As we mentioned, the Iranian football players received their visas for the tournament kicking off on June 11. This is the first time the tournament will see a host nation receive a team from a country it is actively engaged in military conflict with.
The players got in, but 12 crucial support staff members, including the Federation's Secretary General and their media director, were explicitly denied entry. Secretary of State Marco Rubio cited direct security concerns, specifically potential ties those individuals might have to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Translating those military and diplomatic movements into immediate public consequences requires looking at the port blockade. President Donald Trump established that blockade of Iranian ports shortly after the brief April ceasefire agreement. How does last night's missile exchange impact the blockade and the broader economy?
The Strait of Hormuz is the choke point for roughly 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas. The combination of the ongoing U.S. blockade and the active exchange of fire has sent global oil prices soaring this morning, but the secondary impacts are much darker.
You're referring to the United Nations World Food Program report that just dropped.
It is a devastating report. It traces a direct line from this exact naval standoff to an acute crisis in global food security.
The scale of that collateral damage is where we need to focus. We are essentially watching localized naval deterrence in the Middle East translate directly into asymmetrical starvation on other continents. The WFP is warning that restricting these energy and fertilizer supplies is actively pushing 2.5 million people in Somalia, 1.3 million in Sri Lanka, and 2.3 million in Afghanistan into severe hunger.
To understand why a naval blockade causes starvation, you have to look at the chemistry of the supply chain. Nitrogen fertilizer production is inextricably linked to global energy markets. It requires massive amounts of natural gas.
So in Gulf, oil and gas are restricted by a military blockade, global fertilizer prices spike, and agricultural yields simply collapse.
The World Food Program warns that even if hostilities were to permanently cease this afternoon, the damage is done. Farmers are entering their planting seasons without adequate fertilizer. They will harvest significantly smaller crop yields months from now. The irreversible damage to household budgets and humanitarian operations is already baked into the global food supply chain.
How do policymakers in Washington weigh the tactical utility of maintaining that port blockade against the reality of starving millions of people?
The strategic calculation prioritizes the immediate containment of Iranian maritime capabilities. For Washington, crippling the IRGC's ability to operate in the Gulf supersedes the downstream humanitarian fallout, even if that fallout is catastrophic.
Shifting focus from maritime choke points to the escalation of aerial warfare, the entrenched conflict in Eastern Europe is seeing its own unprecedented shifts. Ukraine has launched a massive aerial campaign targeting St. Petersburg.
Timing that assault for the final day of Russia's annual economic forum in St. Petersburg was a highly calculated message. Over 140 drones struck the surrounding Leningrad region, hitting the Kronstadt naval base. They also struck an oil depot 500 kilometers away in the Krasnodar region.
The strikes in the occupied Luhansk regions seem even more systematically destructive. Ukrainian drones have essentially dismantled Russian logistics there, destroying over 200 lorries and 30 fuel trucks just since the beginning of May.
The logistical strikes have been so highly effective that Moscow-installed authorities have actually banned commuter train services and suspended coach routes on major motorways in Luhansk. They simply cannot protect the transport infrastructure.
This tactical shift on the battlefield coincides with a complete breakdown in diplomatic maneuvering. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky sent an open letter to Vladimir Putin this week, utilizing a highly unusual tone.
He openly mocked Putin's 26-year rule. He stated that age is taking its toll on the Russian leader, and he demanded direct face-to-face talks, arguing it is a mistake to simply wait for the war to become the focus of U.S. attention once more.
Putin publicly dismissed the letter as rude during his remarks at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. He refused any meetings until Ukraine officially abandons its NATO aspirations and withdraws entirely from the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions.
Neither leader is laying any genuine groundwork for peace with those statements. They are essentially broadcasting to international stakeholders, particularly Washington. Zelensky is demonstrating Ukraine's capability to fly drones 1,000 kilometers into Russia to prove his forces remain a lethal, viable investment for Western military aid.
While Putin is projecting an image of uncompromising strength to his domestic base, signaling that his war machine is completely untroubled by the drone strikes.
The prospect of an immediate ceasefire remains practically non-existent under those maximalist conditions. Putin explicitly stated that a pause in fighting would only allow Ukraine to regroup and rearm. He is demanding long-term agreements drafted by experts before any leader-level summit could even be considered.
His insistence on goals that require complete Ukrainian capitulation indicates a strategy of long-term attrition. The Kremlin is relying on its larger industrial base to simply outlast Western financial support for Kiev.
When a choke point isn't a physical strait or a military front line, it can be an entire country's economy. That brings us to tomorrow's high-stakes election in Armenia.
On June 7, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan faces a critical test of his mandate. Since coming to power in 2018, Pashinyan has steered the country of 3 million people aggressively toward the European Union, distancing Armenia from Moscow.
His domestic support has plummeted, though. It fell from 54% in 2021 to around 30% today, largely due to the traumatic loss of the Nagorno-Karabakh enclave to Azerbaijan in 2023. Now, opposition leaders are campaigning to restore Moscow's military and economic influence.
That opposition includes former presidents Robert Kacharyan and Serge Sargsyan, who hold deep ties to the Kremlin. Moscow is actively weaponizing its economic leverage to influence the final results of tomorrow's voting.
Russia remains Armenia's largest trading partner, accounting for 36% of its foreign trade last year. To apply pressure, the Kremlin banned the export of Armenian flowers, mineral water, cognac, fresh vegetables, and fruit in the 2 weeks leading up to this election.
It is like Armenia is a tenant trying to change the locks on a deeply aggressive landlord. They might be able to get new keys from Europe, but Russia still controls the thermostat in the middle of winter.
The energy leverage is massive. Russia currently supplies Armenia with highly subsidized gas at $177 per thousand cubic meters. Putin pointedly reminded Pashinyan in a recent public statement that European market prices for that same gas exceed $600.
Pashinyan has drastically reduced his country's reliance on Russian military equipment, sourcing 95% of weapons imports from India, France, and China now. But untangling the economic dependency is an entirely different level of pain for the average citizen.
Pashinyan's main challenger is billionaire Samvel Karapetyan, who made his vast fortune in Russia. Karapetyan is currently under house arrest, accused of plotting to overthrow the government, so he is conducting his entire campaign through his nephew.
The European Union has attempted to counter Russia's pressure. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen pledged 50 million euros and promised to ease trade restrictions for the specific goods targeted by Moscow's bans.
Armenia does not even hold EU candidate status yet, so voters tomorrow are deciding if they are willing to endure immediate, severe economic pain orchestrated by Russia, such as massive heating bills and collapsed agricultural exports, in exchange for Pashinyan's vision of a European integrated state.
This theme of state leverage over critical industries brings our focus back to Washington, D.C. and global financial markets. Yesterday, the Nasdaq index suffered a severe drop of over 4%, marking its worst one-day fall since April 2025.
The S&P 500 closed 2.6% lower, the Dow dropped 1.35%, and digital assets like Bitcoin saw a sharp sell-off. Paradoxically, this was triggered by a U.S. jobs report that was essentially too good.
Strong employment numbers crushed investor hopes that the Federal Reserve will cut interest rates in the near term. We're watching capital rapidly flee overvalued artificial intelligence tech stocks, with major investment funds piling into traditionally safer sectors like utilities, healthcare, and consumer staples.
Against this volatile backdrop, an unprecedented U.S. policy shift is taking shape. President Trump has invited top AI executives to the White House next week to propose the U.S. government acquiring public stakes in their firms.
The administration's stated objective is to shift public perception and ensure that everyday Americans benefit financially from the success of artificial intelligence. But looking at the historical precedent for the U.S. government proposing the partial nationalization of an emerging, highly disruptive technology sector, it is highly concerning.
We're not talking about stabilizing failing banks during a mortgage crisis or bailing out legacy auto manufacturing to save jobs. This is a deliberate state intervention into autonomous tech firms at the absolute height of their power and influence.
How should the public evaluate the dangers of the government taking a direct operational or financial stake in the companies building foundational AI models?
The civic and civil liberty implications of state-entwined artificial intelligence represent a serious governance crisis. The danger lies in the blending of corporate surveillance and autonomous algorithmic capabilities with the coercive power of the state.
If the federal government holds a direct stake in these firms, the barrier between private data collection and government intelligence gathering becomes dangerously porous.
Integrating state authority with autonomous systems elevates the risk of unchecked algorithmic decision-making, ubiquitous surveillance, and automated policing. Treating these technologies as critical state infrastructure alters the balance of power between the citizen and the government in ways that extend far beyond market share.
For more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit claranorratio.com. Building on this intersection of technology, information integrity, and public trust, we look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, where a breakdown in reliable information is proving physically fatal.
The DRC is currently battling its 17th Ebola epidemic, focused in the northeastern Ituri province. This outbreak involves the Bundibugyo variant, with 397 confirmed cases and 63 deaths reported so far.
The medical response is being severely crippled by rampant disinformation. Rumors are circulating rapidly that aid worker vehicle antennas spread the virus, or that the disease is a targeted bioweapon.
This culminated in a violent crowd attacking Mongbalu's General Hospital, burning down a Doctors Without Borders tent, forcing medical staff to flee for their lives. That mob violence resulted in the loss of 18 suspected Ebola patients who were under observation and fled into the community.
Why is this disinformation taking hold so violently right now?
This localized crisis in Ituri province is a direct consequence of a much broader failure in global governance and public health funding. Following the U.S. withdrawal from the World Health Organization in 2025, alongside massive budget cuts ordered to USAID and the CDC's crisis management programs, the international architecture for emergency health response was critically weakened.
Simultaneously, European governments have redirected substantial portions of their international aid budgets toward militarization in response to the ongoing war in Ukraine. When emergency aid budgets are slashed, the funding for essential health communication simply evaporates.
The void left by the absence of credible, well-funded public health campaigns is immediately filled by deadly fake news circulating on platforms like WhatsApp. Fact-checkers in Kinshasa note that severe economic pressures, specifically competition in the local gold mining industry in Ituri province, are driving these rumors.
There are claims that wealthy traders are using the virus as a mystical act to eliminate their business rivals. There are even widespread text messages falsely claiming a conspiracy between Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi and renowned virologist Jean-Jacques Mayembe to wipe out the population in eastern Congo.
The psychology of this is devastating. A rumor on a messaging app is overriding the physical reality of a deadly virus in these communities.
Local authorities are attempting to engage community leaders, but without sustained financial support to combat these complex, deeply rooted narratives, the viral spread of disinformation will continue to outpace the medical containment of the physical virus.
The community's refusal to believe in the disease, despite confirmed testing from the National Institute for Biomedical Research, showcases how fragile public trust is during a health emergency when institutions fail to provide consistent, trustworthy engagement.
We turn finally to a stark, localized reminder of the human cost of military occupation and the breakdown of basic security. The Palestinian Health Ministry reports that a 7-month-old baby boy, Sam Fuad Abu Hakal, was killed by Israeli gunfire in the Tel Rumeida area of Hebron in the occupied West Bank.
The parents were also injured in the shooting. The account of the incident diverged sharply, and we need to clearly distinguish those claims. The Israel Defense Forces claimed their troops perceived a vehicle accelerating toward them, prompting a single soldier to respond with single shots.
The IDF states the incident is under review and expressed sorrow for harm caused to uninvolved individuals. The family's account, provided by the grandmother who was in the vehicle, states they stopped their car at a distance when they saw military vehicles ahead.
She reports that what they initially believed were warning shots struck the infant in the head and lodged in the mother's cheek. This localized tragedy in Hebron sits within a devastating, broader context of civilian loss.
Since the war in Gaza broke out following the Hamas-led attack on Israel in October 2023, more than 1,000 Palestinians have been reported killed in the West Bank alone. In Gaza, the death toll has surpassed 70,600 people, according to the health ministry there.
Tel Rumeida is a known flashpoint where Israeli settlers live with heavy military protection among the Palestinian population. The sheer weight of this continuous civilian casualty rate, manifesting in the death of a 7-month-old infant at a checkpoint, underscores the daily lethal reality of the ongoing military occupation.
Looking across today's developments, there is no single neat narrative tying these events into a perfect bow. Instead, we are observing several distinct, often contradictory pressures moving simultaneously.
We see the overt weaponization of economic trade and energy arteries in the Gulf and the Caucasus. We are witnessing the fracturing of public trust manifesting as physical violence against medical workers in the Congo. And in Washington, we see unprecedented state maneuvers to directly intervene in the foundational infrastructure of artificial intelligence.
What happens to global stability when the foundational layers of human security, our physical food supply routes, the integrity of our medical information, and the architecture of our most disruptive technologies become the primary bargaining chips of state power? Thank you for taking a close look at our sources today on the Clarin Daily World Brief. For more daily briefings and classic audiobooks, visit clarineratio.com.